Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the members. I rise in support of this amendment, number 11, which would maintain some degree of equity with regards to short-term capital gains. And let me begin by acknowledging that there is so much in the bill before us today that we can appreciate, that I know my constituents will appreciate. It's a credit to you, Mr. Speaker. It's a credit to the gentleman from the North End. It's a credit to the gentlelady from Gloucester. It's a credit to the gentleman from Braintree and to all of our colleagues and to all of the staff who worked to bring this tax reform package before us today. Several of these items will provide economic benefit to working families, to seniors, and to people experiencing poverty. From the creation of the child and dependent tax credit, to expansions of the earned income tax credit, the senior circuit breaker, and the rental deduction, there's a lot in this bill that I enthusiastically support, and there's a lot that we can appreciate. And yet there are real concerns about the parts of this bill that overwhelmingly benefit big corporations and the very wealthy. For example, the short-term capital gains tax rate that's at issue with this amendment, and the change to the apportionment factors for big corporations, these items disproportionately benefit the wealthy in our Commonwealth. It's been estimated that 77% of the benefits of the capital gains change will go to the wealthiest 1% of households. Once fully implemented, this package will not be equitable. We heard a moment ago that we're an outlier in cap gains, that we tax capital gains at a different rate than we tax wage and salary income. There's a reason for that. Wage and salary income is the sweat of your brow. That is the working class. What we are saying with the legislation before us today, in particular this short-term capital gains cut, is that we value wage and salary labor in the same way that we value the billionaire who's playing on the stock market. Personally, I don't think that's equitable. We are living in a time of unprecedented wealth and income inequality. Inequality is bad. As Elizabeth Warren, Robert Reich, Thomas Piketty have all noted, inequality doesn't just harm poor people. In the long run, inequality isn't good for rich people either, and it's especially not good for the economy as a whole. So if we care about our economic outlook, which I know we all do, if we care about our competitiveness, then we have to care about the ever-growing wealth and income inequality here in Massachusetts and around the nation. And we have to be intentional about reducing it and not perpetuating it. We must also recognize the intersection of race in this unprecedented wealth and income inequality. There has always been a wage gap along intersecting racial and gender lines in this country. And over the past 25 years, the wealth gap between white and black families has tripled. Boston has been recognized as the most unequal big city in the nation. Massachusetts is as unequal now as it was at any time before or during the Great Depression. In 2015, the Boston Fed found the average net worth of US-born black families in the greater Boston area is $8. Experts believe this wealth gap likely worsened in recent years, and today 1 in 4 Latinos live in poverty in Massachusetts. Those are the facts, and let's be clear, this inequality is not natural. It is, in fact, a product of our policy choices. What policies have resulted in this unprecedented wealth and income inequality, what many commentators have called a second Gilded Age? Tax cuts for the rich and for large corporations have played the central role in driving this inequality in Massachusetts, both directly by funneling money upward to the super wealthy and to big corporations, and also indirectly by depriving us of the revenue we need to make investments in things like affordable housing, affordable childcare, a functioning public transportation system, and state and local infrastructure. In turn, this chronic underinvestment not only exacerbates inequality, it also undermines our competitiveness. There was a time when they called it Taxachusetts. That was a long time ago. The story of taxes in Massachusetts throughout my adult life has been a story of tax cuts. Tax cuts for the rich, tax cuts for big corporations, tax cuts for everyone. That's why none of us had ever heard of Chapter 62F last year. There was no reason. The goal of tax cuts had been fully accomplished. These tax cuts have fueled inequality and undermined our ability to make necessary public investments. 30-plus years ago, the MRVP program, our flagship rental voucher program, provided over 20,000 housing vouchers to those in need. Today, we are able to do less than 10,000. If you put that trend line on a map, you'll see the investment go down, and you'll see family homelessness go up, and it has doubled. That is the legacy of tax cuts in Massachusetts. 30-plus years ago, when Mike Dukakis was governor, the MBTA was safe, reliable, and actually very popular. It's hard to believe. Then we had a string of Republican governors. This House went along with a series of tax cuts, loaded the MBTA up with debt from the Big Dig, and that has resulted in the public transportation disaster we all face. Finally, about a decade ago, we began to take action to reverse this trend. We came up with the idea for the millionaire's tax. Throughout my time in the legislature, the main goal for tax policy for so many of us was to pass that fair share amendment. After 4 votes by this legislature, after 2 successive statewide campaign cycles, the people finally passed the fair share amendment last fall. And in the process, they told us that they want the rich to pay their fair share, and they want us to make bigger public investments. However, the tax package before us now threatens to erase most of the new revenue from the fair share. I understand and trust that in this year's budget, we are faithfully implementing the fair share amendment in an additive fashion. But $1.1 billion is $1.1 billion. And in addition to education and transportation, we desperately need bigger investments in housing, water infrastructure, and so much more. So why does this matter? Won't tax cuts make us more competitive? I agree, tax policy is a real factor with regards to our competitiveness. It's a real factor with regards to affordability. But it's just one of many factors. Our competitiveness lies in our universities, our academic and scientific communities that draw the technology sector to our Commonwealth. Our competitiveness lies in our world-class teaching hospitals, our hospitality, tourism, creative and arts economies, fishing, farming, and many other industries. Our competitiveness comes from our historic policy choices, from being an all-time leader on education and healthcare, to being on the cutting edge of green technology and wind power, to being a consistent leader on civil rights and civil liberties. People want to be here because of our values. People want to be here because of our history of leadership. People want to be here because of our beautiful and diverse landscape and our deep connections to each other in this place that we call home. And perhaps most of all, today, our competitiveness is driven by our infrastructure, the availability of affordable housing and affordable childcare. And for my Cambridge and Somerville constituents in particular, competitiveness is all about the MBTA. Let me point out that it has been 295 days without normal weekday service on our subway system. We do not have the people, we do not have the equipment, we do not have the processes in place to safely run our trains on a regular basis. That's not hyperbole. It's actually the fact. We can't do it right now. And what's worse, we do not even have any roadmap or any timeline for when we can return to regular service. And perhaps most relevant to this conversation, we know that in the next fiscal year, the MBTA is facing an operating budget deficit in excess of $500 million. And that is why tax cuts for the rich and for big corporations are a problem. They don't just exacerbate inequality indirectly. They do so by depriving us of the revenue we need to make and support investments in our long-term competitiveness. As I mentioned at the top, this bill has something for everyone. But the benefits skew to the very wealthy, and that's inequitable. We ought to consider a basic alternatives analysis. We're being told when fully implemented, this is a $1.1 billion bill. How much is that over 10 years? 15 billion, maybe with inflation and rounding errors. Maybe it's a $20 billion commitment over 10 years. We haven't seen those estimates yet. But we ought to ask ourselves, if we had $20 billion to invest in the next 10 years and we committed to universal affordable housing, universal affordable childcare, what would that do for our competitiveness? And would that be a better trade? Final point I want to make is, why is the analysis only in one direction? To be clear, I'm willing to compromise and consider where we may be an outlier. And we've heard how our estate tax and other taxes, capital gains, are outliers. What about something like the tiered corporate minimum? That's an outlier in the other direction. It hasn't been updated in over 30 years. Here in Massachusetts, regardless of size, a corporation can use clever accounting tactics and get their tax bill down to $456. If we included a provision like that, we could help offset some of the trade-offs we're making with the legislation before us. So, in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I would respectfully ask that we withdraw this amendment. My hope and intention would be to withdraw the other amendments that I've submitted today. I will be voting no on this bill, and I would ask that these comments be considered as we move forward through the process on this bill. Thank you so much.